Good morning. Up next, we have Talk Saves Lives with Karen Heisig, Associate Area Director with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Karen Heisig is from Rochester, New York, and spent the last decade as a volunteer for the Western New York chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention before joining the staff in 2020 as the Associate Area Director for the Central and Southern Central New York chapters. While Karen is not a trained mental health professional, she's a suicide loss survivor and has dedicated her life's work to AFSP's mission of saving lives and bringing hope to those affected by suicide. She has spent 3 years facilitating a support group for survivors of suicide loss in Rochester and has delivered countless Talk Saves Lives programs to medical professionals, corporate employees, military veterans, first responders, parents, and teachers. Karen lost her husband, an Army veteran and pharmaceutical sales rep, in 2006, and his younger brother, an immigration lawyer, in 1999, both to suicide. She resides in Webster, New York, with her young adult children. Welcome, Karen.
Our loss group. I think that it's, we talk so much about protective factors and it's so important. I even changed my view here. I know you guys can't see it well, but I was facing the cabinets. I'm like, oh, I'm going to face the trees, but I can't really see it. It's a little bright behind me, but my name is Karen and thanks for having me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because we only have 30 minutes. There are slides that I'm going to kind of fast forward through. This is going to be the quick sneak peek for Talk Saves Lives and suicide prevention, an introduction to suicide prevention. We regularly offer programs virtually at this time. So if you go to our chapter pages, afsp.org, at the top of the screen, you can find your chapter, whatever chapter is closest to you, just by putting in your zip code. And you'll come up, if you live in the Central New York area, you'll come up with the Central New York chapter. And if you scroll down on our chapter page, there are all kinds of programs coming up, including one for veterans. So we encourage you to check there frequently, and you'll see a listing of our programs. They're always free. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. And we'll get started right away. All right, you should all see my screen, Talk Saves Lives, an introduction to suicide prevention. This is such an important topic to me, and I really truly believe that talk saves lives and that we all have a role to play in suicide prevention. We don't have to be a mental health professional in order to have a conversation, just like we don't have to be a medical professional to administer CPR or first aid to somebody, right? So just like CPR and first aid, there are things that we can all do to prevent suicide and to have this conversation and save lives. We know suicide is a health issue. It's a complex health issue. We know it can be prevented. Just like, there are risk factors and warning signs for a heart attack. And we know that there are things we can do to prevent that heart attack. There are risk factors and warning signs for suicide. They might be really subtle, but they're important to know and understand so that we can save lives. While we may not be able to prevent every suicide, we can vastly improve so many lives by talking about mental health and having this conversation and knowing what to do if somebody we know is in crisis or if we're in crisis ourselves. We're going to talk a little bit about the scope of the problem, the research that really informs everything in this topic, and everything that it has taught us, the prevention and what we can all do. How we talk about suicide really matters. So forgive me if I'm going through this quickly, but like I said, I want to give you a quick overview of all this and then encourage you to join us at a future program. Language do's and don'ts. It's not helpful at all to say somebody committed suicide or they had a failed or successful attempt. We don't get a grade. There's no grading system here, right? To say they committed or failed or successful just really implies judgment or things that just perpetuate the stigma that surrounds suicide and mental health topics. So change that language to somebody died by suicide and we all end up in a better place. Let's talk about the scope of the problem. 800,000 people worldwide die by suicide every year. This is by the World Health Organization. These numbers are actually thought to be higher because many countries don't have an accurate reporting system. But what that means is that every 40 seconds, someone in the world dies by suicide. Someone's coping mechanisms have been overwhelmed by a sense of desperation and hopelessness. And they feel like that is their only option. In the United States, it's the 10th overall leading cause of death. And that's across the lifespan. The largest number of suicides, most people are mistakenly think that it's young people. And while it is the second leading cause of death in 10 to 24-year-olds, that number is much lower than thought. It is actually white males, 45 to 65, who are the largest number. They account for, I think, over 70% of all suicides in the United States. And I guarantee you, you all know one of those, right? You know somebody in that age group. And they all, I'm 51, and if they're like me, they grew up in a generation that we weren't talking about these things. So it's still hard for us to talk about it. We need to change that for our younger generation. For every suicide attempt, it's thought about 25 other people attempt suicide. Those are the people who end up needing medical attention for a suicide attempt, not those who don't. So those numbers are even thought to be higher. But throughout the world, or throughout the United States, it's estimated that close to 11 million people every year in the United States live with suicidal ideations. They're thinking about it. They report, that's self-reporting through research. Those who have made a plan is about 3.3 million people. Those who make an actual attempt are these folks here, which is about 1.4 million people every year. It's important to know that those who attempt suicide and thankfully survive, 90% of those folks don't ever go on to die by suicide, the vast majority, right? So we know that 48,000 people died in 2018, and there's something we can do about that. Suicide impacts communities and individuals, just like any other loss. So many questions, could have, should have, would have. Why didn't they come to me? Why didn't I know? Why didn't I see the signs? I didn't know they were struggling. It's the scope of it is really pretty large. It makes it difficult to deal with. It has an economic impact. We'll go ahead and skip that slide. Like I said, we'll skip some of these. But let's talk a little bit about the research, because the research really informs so much of what we know. All right, so research looks at this big question: why do people take their own lives? What we do know is that there's no single cause. You know, historically speaking, we have often, we think that it's an environmental factor, that somebody was bullied and therefore died by suicide, or they lost their job or had a legal problem and therefore died by suicide. And that is simply not the case. There are lots of other factors going on. We know the large majority of people who die by suicide have a mental health condition present that is contributing at the time of their death. They might not even realize that they have a mental health condition, or they realize they have something going on, but they just don't know that there's help out there. They don't know that there are things you can do to make that better and to treat it. So it's really important knowing if there's the presence of a mental health condition. We also know this through research, that about 25% of the United States population will have a mental health diagnosis at some point in their life. The vast majority do not go on to die by suicide. So we know mental health reasons or mental health conditions can't be the only factor. We know there are some physical differences in the brain, those parts of the brain that control your stress response and impulse control. So, you know, when you think about somebody who is self-medicating, let's say with alcohol, what does alcohol do to our impulse control and our stress response? It inhibits it, right? So when you add in this other factor that there are some differences in the brain structure that are controlling these things, then you can see where logical thinking isn't happening, because that brain function is not working properly. We know there's a lot of ambivalence. People are thinking, part of me wants to live, but part of me really wants to end my pain. I would really beg to argue with anybody that nobody really wants to die. That sense of hopelessness and despair is so great, and their focus is so narrow that they're not logically thinking. You know, somebody might be in that place where they're thinking, people would be better off without me. That is not logical thinking, right? So we know that's not happening. They're ambivalent. They want that pain to end, We know if you're sitting down, I want you to go ahead and stretch your arms out wide. Give yourself a really good stretch because it feels good to move around a little bit and fill those lungs with oxygen. Take a deep breath. But if you have your arms out wide, this is normal perspective. We can think about all of our different options. We can think about problem solving skills, coping mechanisms, social skills. Who do I reach out to? I should go see my doctor. We're thinking about all those logical things, right? When life gets tough, because it often does, regardless of whether or not you have a mental health condition, life can be tough, especially now. So, but what happens when somebody's in crisis is that perspective narrows, right? So it becomes that very narrow tunnel vision where a crisis point has absolutely been reached. Their thinking has become overwhelmed and they're not thinking about other options. So that's really important to know. Teresa, I'm going to trust that you are monitoring the chat box. And if there are questions that you really need me to stop and answer, I will. But I'll definitely look at those chat questions at the end so that we can answer them. Oh, I just lost my mouse. Where did it go? Research tells us who's at risk and risk factors. If you think about cardiac arrest and heart disease, if you yourself have a family history, you see history on the screen here. If you have a history of heart disease or cardiac arrest, if you have your own health, you know, when you think about cardiac arrest, if you have high blood pressure, you're not eating right, you know, you need to lose weight and exercise, and it's just hard to do those things. And then if your environmental factors, like, you know, your stress level is really high due to work or your home life or whatever that looks like, we know that for cardiac arrest, when you combine these risk factors, your risk for heart attack goes up. And mental health and suicide prevention are no different. So when we think about health factors, the biggest of which are mental health factors, depression is by far the most common. When we think about other health factors that contribute, that serious or chronic health condition that somebody might have, chronic pain, a serious head injury, you know, there's a reason that experts are worried about traumatic brain injury and concussions. Think about historical factors. You know, we're not always sitting around the Thanksgiving table talking about these things, right? We're not talking about mental health. We know who has diabetes, we know who's had a cancer diagnosis, who has high blood pressure, but we're not talking about these things. And these are important to know because mental health and physical health are all connected, right? So historical factors, what is that family history? Is there a family history of suicide? Is there a family history of mental health conditions that nobody has talked about? But knowing that there are some biological genetic factors going on. Is there a history of childhood abuse or childhood trauma that's never been addressed? A previous suicide attempt is a risk factor. But we also, remember, we know that most people who attempt suicide don't go on to die by suicide. And certainly loss of any sort can be a historical factor that increases somebody's risk, no matter what that loss looks like, whether it's the loss of a loved one, a job, a home, whatever that is. And we know environmental factors often are a risk, right? They add onto those other things. None of these on their own are thought to cause suicide, right? But when you combine them, when there are multiple risk factors going on, that's when we really need to be paying attention and having conversations. So there's environmental factors, like what is their access to lethal means? You know, the thing is with suicide is that if you take away lethal means, whatever that looks like, chances are really good somebody's not going to die by suicide. So how do we do that? We're going to talk about that in a bit. But prolonged stress, exposure to somebody else's suicide, contagion, which is a very real concern amongst especially younger people, a stressful life event. This is the challenge, okay? The challenge is that what everybody sees is that environmental factor, and that's what we talk about, that's what we address, that's what we want to fix. But what most people don't realize is that maybe the person who died by suicide had these other factors going on. Maybe they were at genetic risk for suicide. Maybe they've been diagnosed with depression and they were treating themselves with alcohol or other substances to feel better or to hopefully feel better. We all know that alcohol is a depressant, and if anything, it exacerbates it and makes it worse. Maybe they'd had really prolonged stress at work, and the stress was making the depression worse, or the depression was making the stress worse. But we have to talk about the whole picture and recognize that it's more than just one thing. Maybe research can tell us these things. You know, if we had all the answers and we'd figured it all out, we wouldn't need to do research. But I'm really proud to say that the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is the largest private funder of suicide prevention research in the United States. And that's huge. You know, we do community and campus walks, we do fundraising in our local communities, and half of those funds do programs like this so that we can have a staff person and train volunteers and provide free resources and do so many of those things. But the other half goes to the national initiatives of Project 2025, reducing the suicide rate 20% by 2025, and really looking at how we can do that, doing that important, necessary research. We can't solve these problems without research. Advocacy at the state and national level. There's so much important work that we do. All right, so go ahead and wiggle around a little bit if you need to. I need a sip of water. Katie talked about that, right? So grab your, stay hydrated and stay with me. We are 11:46, so we're right on target. Let's talk a little bit about prevention, protective factors. Katie talked about some of those in her previous sessions. If you didn't see that, I know it's been recorded and you go back and see it. But mental health care, taking care of yourself, checkup from the neck up is probably one of the most important. Family and community support is a protective factor. We need that, right? We need connection. Good problem solving skills, whether that's actual problem or social skills, because when we're isolated and when we're apart from people, we kind of become socially awkward, and we forget that it's okay to reach out and that it's okay to engage and help with our friends. And we're not getting that as much as often, especially now. Cultural and religious beliefs that encourage a sense of purpose are certainly a protective factor. Mental health care, the most important ingredient, but this is the challenge. It's up to all of us to create a culture that knows that it's smart to take care of your mental health. It's smart to talk about mental health, because the problem, remember I said that 1 in 4 of us will have a mental health condition at some point in our life. The problem is that only 2 in 5 with mental health conditions seek treatment. Why is that? You know, why aren't we seeking treatment for ourselves or for a loved one? And you know, if you were here in an audience with me, I know you'd give me the answers of shame, stigma, denial, access to care. There's so many things going on, but probably the biggest of which is shame and stigma. You know, we feel like having a mental health condition is a sign of weakness, and it's not. It's simply the way your brain is wired, how your brain responds to stress, and there's something that can be done about it. Being proactive means we make it a priority to get a checkup from the neck up when we're concerned, that we get that thorough evaluation and assessment, that we are honest with our doctors. If you're here, I'd ask how many of you are 100% honest with your doctor. I would guarantee you only about 5 or 10% people will say that they're honest, completely 100% honest with their doctors. So getting an evaluation and being really honest about what is going on, because they can't fix what they don't know is happening, right? So talking about what will work best for you, trying different things, but staying in close contact with that mental health care medical provider, and also that you have a working plan, and that if something's not working, you can make those important adjustments. Laws, I'm going to go ahead and skip that one. Self-care. I hope that all of you have a plan for this today. Katie talked about these things, and they're so important, because remember, if you think about suicide prevention in the same way we think about heart health, right? If we're at risk for heart attack, there are things our doctor's going to tell us to do. They're right here on the screen. High risk for heart attack. doctor's going to tell you, you need to change your lifestyle, exercise, eat right, get good sleep. It's so important to set that circadian rhythm, especially at this time of year. Go to bed at the same time, get up at the same time. Do those things to help you get a good night's sleep, because that takes a toll on your overall mental health and physical health. Good stress management. That's what a doctor's going to tell you to do. Maybe take a medication, have regular follow-up. If you choose not to engage in any of those protective factors, you do nothing to decrease your risk for heart attack. And suicide prevention is no different. Mental health care is no different. We have to actively participate. As an adult who has a mental health diagnosis of depression and anxiety, I know it's not easy. I know some days are not easy to get out of bed and to, boy, sometimes I count it a victory if I get out of bed, make the bed, and at a minimum take a shower for the day, right? I know these things are hard to do, but they have to be done. You know, if you're 200 pounds overweight and you are at high risk for heart attack, it's hard to get off the couch and to move your body and to eat right when you have really bad habits. I know that. We all know it, but it takes actively participating, okay? I can't say it enough. Supporting people who have lost someone. We call that postvention. If you've lost someone to suicide, I'm so sorry. I know how that feels. We hope you'll join us. Oswego County is doing an International Survivors of Suicide Lost Day program this year. You can find out more by connecting with their coalition, or following up with Teresa and asking her about it. But International Survivors of Suicide Lost Day is the Saturday before Thanksgiving every year, and AFSP supports those programs. But it's a way for people who have lost someone to connect. If you're not already involved in a support group, you don't really know anybody else who has lost a loved one. It's a way for you to connect with others who simply get it. And sometimes that peer connection makes all the difference.
Hello?
I know it did for me. So support for loss survivors and lived experience. It's so, so important to support both of those, because that becomes prevention. Most important thing is time. Remember, if this window, this wide open window becomes narrow, then the most important thing we can do is connect with the person, or that part of the person that wants to stay alive, and put time and distance between their thoughts of ending their life and their access to means. So let's talk about that really quick, because this is such an important piece. Limiting access to means. Remember what I said a little earlier. If somebody is thinking about suicide and we remove their access to means, chances are that suicide will not occur. The majority of people do not substitute with another means. So limiting access to means this, that maybe there's a $5 carbon monoxide sensor that can be put on cars. The car gets those carbon monoxide levels get too high, the car automatically shuts off. Barriers on bridges. We know in geographical areas where there are a large number of suicides due to a bridge, when they build those bridge barriers and put them on and take that away as a means, those numbers go down. Blister packaging on medication. What if you can't just dump out a bottle and instead have to fuss with one of those foil packets where you have to get each one out individually? Remember, because this space can last minutes, or it can last longer. But in that moment of impulsivity, when that window has narrowed very quickly, and if that moment only lasts a few minutes or 5 minutes, we need to give people time, right? Time for somebody to intervene, time to get help, time to open that perspective up enough, just enough so that they think about other things they can do, all right? To get them out of that moment of absolute hopelessness and despair. Securing firearms, it's not a political conversation. Over 50% of those 48,000 suicides in the United States in 2018 were due to a firearm. I think that everybody can agree, whether you own a firearm or not, everyone can agree we don't want people to die using a firearm. So it is so critical, so critical that you take steps to secure a firearm. it is the most lethal means, right? The vast majority of people, if they use a firearm, they're not going to survive that. They're not going to get that second chance at life, right? And to get help. So it's really critical that if you own a firearm, you're concerned about yourself or someone else in your home, that you take steps to secure that. There's a lot more about that on the Project 2025 website, and certainly with the County Coalition, you can find out more information about that. All right, so winding it up. What can we all do? Have a conversation. We're going to talk about that quickly. Watch for the warning signs, reach out and seek help. Warning signs, if you think about these as invitations for help, they're going to be there. They might be very subtle, but they come in these three areas: talk, behavior, and mood. Someone thinking about ending their life is going to talk about it. They're going to post on social media. They're going to text about it. They're going to drop subtle hints. Maybe it's, I just feel like people would be better off without me. I don't feel like I have a purpose anymore. I don't feel like this is going to get better. They're going to talk about it. Their behavior is going to change. You're going to see some behavior changes that make you go, what's going on? Maybe it's increased use of substances, issues with sleep, acting recklessly, looking for a way to end their life, giving away a prized possession. In and of itself, if my best friend gave me her prized possession, I would not necessarily think she was thinking about suicide, because I know her well enough to know other risk factors aren't present, but it would make me have a conversation, right? It would make me go, whoa, hey, I know this is really important to you. What's up? Why are you giving this to me? Is there something else going on? It warrants a conversation, right? Mood, these are all things: depression, apathy, rage, irritability, impulsivity, anxiety, humiliation. These are all moods we would expect of somebody who's reached a desperation point. So that's a lot to watch for, right? Between risk factors and warning signs, you have to trust your gut and assume you're the only person that's going to reach out. I know it's a lot to look for. And if you've reached out before, if that's you, and it didn't go so well, reach out again. I promise you that there are people out there who care, want to connect with you, and want to be able to help you through that hard spot. But trust your gut and assume you're the only one who's going to reach out. So let's talk really quickly about how to reach out. We want to talk to someone in private. We want to listen to their story. And one of the words you can make with listen is silent. It's so important that we ask questions and then we close our mouth and allow somebody that space to open up without jumping in and trying to fix it for them. Express concern and caring, that there's no judgment. And if you remember or take away nothing else from this presentation, I want you to remember this: asking directly about suicide is such a critical component. We have to ask directly. And that means, has it ever gotten so bad that you've thought about suicide? Are you thinking about suicide? Sometimes when people are really overwhelmed, they think about suicide. Are you thinking about ending your life? We can't plant the seed. That is an absolute myth. If somebody's not thinking about suicide, we're not going to plant that seed. So if you remember nothing else today, and you suspect that somebody's going through a difficult time, and some of those signs are there, and the risk factors, then you want to ask them, look, I really care about you. Have you had any thoughts of suicide? It's so important, right? And then encourage them to seek mental health services, whether that's seeing their own general practice doctor, a therapist, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, checking out services that are for free at the Office of Mental Health, or whatever's available in your community. And if you don't know, reach out to the Oswego County Coalition, because they can tell you where to get help. There are some things to avoid doing. We'll go ahead and skip that. If you think someone might make an attempt, you've asked them and they've said, yeah, I've had those thoughts. Stay with them. Offer to make a phone call with them to that 1-800-crisis line number, or the text line. If it's safe, secure, or remove those lethal means, if it's safe for you, or escort them yourself to mental health services, whatever that might look like. Know these numbers. Due to amazing advocacy efforts, you've probably heard that that 1-800 number is going to be changed to a 3-digit number. That won't go in effect fully until June of 2022. But meanwhile, use that number, know that number, and know that it took several years of advocating, saying we need a 3-digit number, because this other number is too hard to remember. And somebody in crisis, we need to give them an easy option. For emergencies, please don't hesitate to call 911 because we can do this. We can create a culture that is smart about taking care of our mental health and vastly improve the lives of many when they know that it's smart to reach out. It's not a sign of weakness. So Teresa, thank you for having me on today. I do have 2 full programs coming up on October 28th and 29th. I've shared those out with the Oswego Coalition, so hopefully we'll be sharing those dates. And I will put my address in the chat box. Let's look at some of these questions.
Colbert Tuesday night to promote her new book, Songteller, and her new album, Holly Dolly Christmas. Harding reminisced about her mom singing around the house.
All right, I don't think there's any questions in here.
For Colbert.
Great.
So much,
Teresa,
Karen.
I will hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Karen. It's been a great presentation. I know you had to fit in a really lot, but you did. You did a great
I think that's the
job.
fastest I've ever done this.
Thank you so much, Karen.
Pretty beautiful.
You're welcome.